Welcome to your 2016 Landis Cooperative Demonstration Farm. I'm Brian Burns, Field Sales Agronomist at Farneville-Sheridan, and joining me today at my station is Ryan Rice, our Field Sales Agronomist over at Loreauville. And at this station today, we're going to be talking about how the stresses of the 2016 growing season has impacted this corn crop. And more specifically, we're going to talk about how our nitrogen program and our plant health fungicide programs have interacted with those stresses. And you might ask, well, why just nitrogen and fungicides? Well, at Landis Cooperative, we feel like after the corn has gone in the ground, those are the two most important things that we can manage to move our corn towards a higher yield. So we want to focus on how they interacted with the stresses of this year's growing season and can potentially benefit you. So in order to do that, we're going to have to take a look at our weather patterns that we saw throughout this growing season. And to do that, we're going to basically start in the month of March and move through till now, looking at precipitation and temperature for this growing season. And just to explain the charts real quickly, when you look at a chart, the blues, purples, and darker purples would be above normal, the reds would be below normal, and the oranges. So I want to talk more specifically about kind of the farm we're standing on here today and around us. March and April, in general, we saw precipitation be a little bit below normal. And go ahead and spin around. And we look at our temperature charts, we saw that be well above normal. So in fact, in the month of March, as you can see, we were running as high as 8 to 10 degrees on average above normal, which is really exceptionally high. So what was the implications of that on our crop? Well, right off the bat, these higher temperatures brought in our first stress. It allowed us to go out and get our anhydrous ammonia on very timely. We saw most of our anhydrous go on in March. However, we also saw our soil temperatures spike up into 60 degrees or higher several times in March and April, which is really pretty uncharacteristic. And as most of you would remember, our nitrogen goes on in the ammonium form, which is stable in the ground, but microbial activity in the ground will begin to break that down and convert it to nitrate, nitrite, which is no longer stable and can be lost. Well, that microbial activity really steps up when we get past a 50-degree soil. So right off the bat, we already had conditions where conversion of our nitrogen was a possibility. And that is why at Landis Cooperative, we are very, very adamant that using a nitrogen stabilizer in your nitrogen applications is a very beneficial and necessary thing. Those above normal temperatures and below normal precip also allowed us to be very timely with our planting dates. We saw in this area generally corn planting start around the 10th of April and move all the way through to about the 26th. By the 26th, we were over 90% done. So very early planting window in general. And as we get later in our discussion, Ryan will talk about what maybe some of the implications of that really early planting date could have on us when we end this growing season. So now we're going to look at just the month of May for precipitation. And as you can see in our area, now all of a sudden we were well above normal on precipitation and a little bit below normal on temperature. So we took a swing from what we just come out of in the last 2 months. And this started to add in several stresses to our corn crop. The above normal precipitation, we saw some stand problems develop. We just had emergence issues out here where we got some stands that aren't exactly where we would like them to be. Once we got the corn out of the ground, we saw some diseases enter our root systems and can be found in our crowns, most notably fusarium. If you look in the crowns of these plants, we had fusarium enter in our root systems and now residing as a discoloration in our crown. And again, we'll talk about what the implications of that will be later in our growing season as we move further in our discussion. This wet weather also caused our corn to struggle to get its root system into its nitrogen program. It became very evident in the countryside that some form of a readily available nitrogen, such as 32 or urea, was necessary in order to get corn off to a really good early start. And also this wet weather now created the conditions for nitrogen leaching and loss. As we talked about, we had warm weather for conversion in April and March. Now we've got the wet weather to start losing nitrogen. So let's go ahead and jump into our June weather. So we look at June, precipitation well below normal. So we come off a wet May, now we go into an extremely dry June. We look at our temperatures, also very, very much above normal. So in fact, I looked up We had 13 days in the month of June at 90 degrees or higher, which placed it the 11th hottest June in 144 years. Records have been kept. So implications of this, well, the little bit drier actually was beneficial in the fact that it allowed our corn to get rooted finally into our nitrogen programs and shape up. So that part was a good thing. But the heat, on the other hand, was not. We had high enough temperatures where we had plants respirating or burning up energy during the night to maintain themselves. We were running through our growth phases at a very accelerated pace. Typically, we would see corn take 3 days or a little over to develop each node in a new leaf. We were actually moving that at closer to a 2-day time span. And that can be seen out here in our corn this year being a little bit shorter than normal. A lot of guys have noticed that their corn's a little shorter. We've shortened that internode distance because we pinched that time frame that it took to move from one node to another. And then we'll jump into our July, and I'll speak of July and August. We don't have the charts put together because we haven't completed August, but we'll speak of July and August together. But as we move into July, and I think we'll find this to be the case as well in August, we go back well above normal on precipitation. So again, the exact opposite of June. And then on our temperatures, we see fairly normal with a little pocket of above normal in this area. And I would say of all the charts that I looked at, this is the one that's probably the most misleading, because if we actually dissect how July went, we had a time frame in the beginning of July that was well above normal on temperature. We also had a time frame about the 3rd week of July that was very much above normal. That's important in the fact that that was some critical timing on our corn. We saw in that 3rd week of July area, temperatures well in the 90s. In the plot behind me, we saw corn go from tasseling to R3 or milk stage in about a 14-day time frame. Typically that should have been something more like a 22-day time frame because of the additional heat that we had there. That is going to have an impact on our corn's grain fill. And we'll probably see that in overall kernel mass when we reach the end of this year. And to clarify, when I say kernel mass, we probably won't pick it up in test weights, because as a kernel goes smaller, generally we pack more kernels into a bushel. Our test weights can actually go higher or stay up. We'll just see it in a loss of overall grain mass. The other thing, I guess in the month of July and August with that additional precip, I felt like this was a time frame where the conditions up to this point would have caused us to start seeing some nitrogen loss issues show up in our corn. But because we had rainfall at a very consistent pace, literally almost once a week in this time frame, we mineralized a lot of organic matter in our soils. We're blessed with really high organic matter soils. We mineralized that and made nitrogen available to the plant. So Mother Nature helped us out and basically, for lack of a better word, side dressing our corn for us. Had we not had that, I think we would be seeing additional nitrogen problems at this point. So to kind of recap it all on nitrogen throughout the year, nitrogen stabilizer is very important. That's a reason why we really push these products. You can see we had the weather this year where they really should have paid off and done their job. Having a readily available source of nitrogen this year up front was important to help get this corn through that wet, tough time of May. The fields that did not have that struggled more to get uniformed up. And then the last thing is, in thinking about your nitrogen programs, is do you have a nitrogen program that can get you through the season? I think it's realistic to say that 240 to 50 bushel corn is a fairly realistic yield goal anymore for a lot of growers. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But my question to you is, do you think your nitrogen program put on up front is going to allow you to get there? So let's consider the fact that what kind of weather does it take to have 250 bushel corn? And what's the odds that we're going to have that weather also coincide with the kind of weather where our nitrogen program all stays intact and allows it? It's a very difficult thing to pull off. So we've got to think about how we design our nitrogen programs to get us through all these bumps in the road that we see in the weather through the growing season. From this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ryan, and he's going to talk a little bit about our fungicides and the plant health side of how the stress has played out this year.
As Brian mentioned, two kind of things we can do after the corn crop gets in. One being nitrogen, second being crop protection on the case of fungicide. You know, you guys as farmers have proven it to yourself over several years that in the presence of foliar diseases, a fungicide works. Time and time again, it works. But in a year like this, when we don't have any foliar diseases, when we need to be fungiciding at tassel time, what are we gonna do? You know, there's a lot of things out here that we as agronomists will talk to you about, the big one being plant health benefits going forward. And being the big thing there is a reduction in cellular respiration, keeping that plant healthy into the season. You know, we saw some extremely high temperatures right after tassel time in that first and third week of June. You know, so what we're going to show here is a little bit of research that we did out of these plots here in Farnhamville and show you what we came up with. So what we did is we took a thermal imaging camera into the crop here. So this plot behind us had a fungicide applied to it. The plot behind us did not. We took a thermal imaging camera in at 3 different times during the day, 7:45 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 4:15 p.m. to just look at what the corn crop was doing as far as a heat release from that crop. And what we can see is the fungicide is applied is going to be on the top here at each time frame, comparing it to down low here with our non-fungicide applied. Now the color variation is going to be a little bit different because our range will move. But as you can see, starting off early in the morning, we're relatively close temperature-wise in the crop at the ear and at the ear node. Now within about 2 degrees, but as we move throughout the day, we see that temperature really start to move apart. By 11:30, we're 6 degrees, and by 4:15, we're almost 12 degrees different. So what does that mean? You know, when we're looking at a crop, temperature is not an indication of energy. It's more of a dictator of how fast that crop is moving through maturity. So if we're seeing higher temperatures, we're shortening that maturity, shortening that grain fill period, and getting back to what Brian said, creating shallower kernels, smaller kernels, and getting into this sort of situation where we see a lot of tipping back. As it goes through, the plant doesn't have enough energy to fill out those kernels and it starts aborting them back. So I think we've really proven here that a plant health aspect really works for these plants. We're keeping that grain fill period longer, keeping that plant cooler through these high temperature situations. You know, so going forward, what are we looking at? You know, like Brian said, this corn crop got in early in April, and we put a lot of it in. So 105-day hybrid, you know, pretty typical for this area. 2,600 GDUs to reach black layer. Right now we're sitting at 2,200 GDUs accumulated since April 18th. So we only need 400 more GDUs to reach black layer. If we average 20 GDUs, that's 20 days to black layer, guys. From today, we can expect 105-day maturities in this area to black layer on September 4th. Early September black layers, it's a little bit scary. You know, from our side of things is early September typically is still hot. We'll still get hot days into the 80s, 90s. We'll get some warm winds. This plant, when it shuts down, it is going to shut down really, really fast. And compared to the last half of September, when we get cooler temperatures, that plant's going to shut down a lot slower. So if we're black layering on September 4th on 105 day, you can figure your 110 days and most of the corn around here will be black layered by the third week of September. You know, so if we don't have a fungicide on this crop, we're going to shut down early. We've been seeing crown rots and diseases like Brian talked about. Guys, we've been seeing this since May. What's this going to do to us when we get into the plant being shut down? We have no internal structure to keep that plant rigid. All we're doing is being held up by that rind. If I don't have a fungicide to help build that rind, we get a strong wind, you can expect some corn to start going down. You know, we'll start seeing top dieback. We're going to start seeing a lot of issues with an early dry down in corn here. There's a lot of things that we can do going in season to help protect this stuff going into harvest. You know, at the end of the day, when we're sitting down with your agronomist at the end of the year, you look back on all the weather and, you know, the climatologists will probably say it's going to be an average year. But you got to remember, swings and extremes will make averages. You know, you look back at March, we were extreme high temperatures. Look at May, extreme low temperatures, a lot of rain. June and July, high temperatures, not a lot of rain. Those averages, guys, we got to remember that those extremes hit at crucial times in the corn plant's life, and we're going to see these issues show up in the combine at fall, and we've got to be prepared for them. Thank you for coming out today. Really appreciate it. We hope you learn a lot here and have questions and are excited to be out here and what this Landis Cooperative team is doing for you.